Everyone. First, before we get down to business, we have a special performance by members of the Washington County All-County Jazz Ensemble. And they happen to be two students at the Barbara Ingram School for Fine Arts here in Hagerstown. And they're going to be playing in recognition of Jazz and Poetry Month, the proclamation for which I read last week, and I will not read again today. You can refer to our YouTube site if you really want to hear the verbiage of that. But I'm going to turn it over to Ryan and Lucas from the Barbara Ingram School. And I also want to recognize Rob Hovermail from the Washington County Public Schools, who is in charge of all the fine arts for Washington County. So welcome and take it away, fellas.
Thank you. This is a little bit less of a jazzy piece, more of a rock, actually. I don't know how many of you would remember Nirvana back in the 80s and 90s. But, so we're going to be playing an arrangement for two cellos, which is actually famous on YouTube. And this is Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Good job. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Keep up the good work.
I think we should think about doing this to start every meeting.
You would think we should have some music before every meeting? That'd be great. I'm going to go ahead and present this proclamation to you guys, and you can share it with your peers at the school. How does that sound?
Very good.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for being here. Oh, and let me not forget to give you these gifts for coming in today, sharing your talents with us. Indeed.
Next week we'll have poetry.
Excellent.
Good.
Next week is poetry. It's always good to have a little entertainment to get things started. Poetry in motion, maybe. We have a special session scheduled, and I believe we need a motion to go into special session.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of going into a special session, please say aye.
Aye.
We are now in special session for the approval of a resolution authorizing a loan to grant business assistance package with Greg and Marjorie Kane, owners of the Flying Pie Company.
Mr. Mayor, I move for Mayor and Council approval of a resolution authorizing the city to enter into a loan to grant business assistance agreement not to exceed the amount of $15,000 with Greg and Marjorie Kane, owners of the Flying Pie Company, in connection with its commitment to downtown Hagerstown and anticipated creation of new jobs to be paid for from the Economic Redevelopment Unreserved Fund.
Second.
I have a motion made by Mr. Metzner and seconded by Mr. Munson. Any discussion? All those in favor of approval of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the resolution is approved. Thank you, everybody. That'll adjourn our special session and enter into the work session. And the first item on the agenda for the work session is a discussion on the collection of delinquent utility bills. And we have our distinguished staff people, Mr. Scott Nicewarner, Mr. Mike Spiker, and Ms. Beth Everhart. Nice to meet you. It's nice to have a face with a name.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Three of us are here concerning information that was requested on the collection of delinquent utility bills. I'd sent an email out a couple weeks ago just informing Bruce about the resumption of electric service interruptions that were starting April 1st, and just provided some background information on how that process goes. And I know there's been some questions since then concerning the process, concerning the collection of revenue, and we're here to provide you any answers that we can along those lines. What I can tell you up to today, or through today, we've been able to have 4 days in which we have been able to interrupt service for customers that are in termination status. We couldn't do anything Wednesday and Thursday of last week due to the temperature. We're under a temperature requirement that 32 or below, we're not able to interrupt service. And we don't interrupt service regardless on Fridays, simply for the fact that if someone doesn't get home until after the offices are closed, we don't want a whole weekend to go where there's no electric. So we have had 4 days of service interruptions. That's amounted to 218 accounts. Of those 218 accounts, we have been able to get payment and service restored for 104 of those accounts, and that's about $70,000 in revenue we've been able to recoup in those 4 days. Actually, 104 out of 218 is almost 50%, and that's pretty good for 4 days. Usually, we run about 35 to 40% of those that get turned back on. So we're doing pretty good along those lines. The average, if you work an average out of those, the amount of the bills that have been owed that we have terminated, it's about $672 per bill, which has been in arrearage. So that's probably a little higher than we're used to. I think I alerted you all to that. It's a little bit higher than what we're used to seeing in having arrearage amounts. We have gotten through, and Beth could give you more information. We have gotten through the majority of the real big ticket arrearages. We're now working our way down into what we would consider a more normal arrearage, a more workable arrearage for most people. So we hope to get back into a regular routine of collections here in the next week or so.
the air conditioning units go in, then what are we looking at? When air goes on, then they're going to go back up again.
They don't usually go up as high as someone with
winter?
electric heat.
Really?
But they do go up.
Yeah.
But we have the ability, obviously, all summer to disconnect unless it's 95 degrees.
Yeah, I know
or-
that, but still, it's collecting the money, getting the money, because
Right.
then we're going to go back into winter, and if these people are also on electric heat,
Right.
then here we go again.
Right.
Correct.
And we make, as I stated in the email, we make every effort to work with those that really want to work with us. We do, obviously, we want 100% of the arrearage or of the bill to collect. However, we do understand that there are situations that people find themselves in, and we'll do the best we can to try to help them out. The one thing we don't want to get into a situation of is where it becomes looked at as an entitlement, and that's not what this is about.
Would you like me to give you some numbers? I'm sorry, Councilman Alisher, I didn't mean to. I know you've got some questions on there, but
So the bill for electric is like water and sewer attached to the property owner, correct?
No.
no,
No,
sir.
water is attached to the property owner.
Yeah.
Okay. And I note that over the last 3 or 4 years, our vacant unit rate in the city has went from about 7% to over 10%. And this term in the memo addresses property owner as it relates to water and sewer side, but that property owner, I'm familiar that oftentimes when a bank enters foreclosure proceedings, that proceeding can be delayed, and in effect you continue to bill a property owner or a homeowner that is no longer there because the bank won't change the deed into the bank's name.
In most cases, we shut that water off and the meter's full.
And then the fixed charges leave, so there are no charges.
Right.
Typically with zero, we do, if the meter's in, we leave the fixed charge on because we have that cost to absorb it. We do like to get it off if possible. And for, water and wastewater, we consider the entire amount that's collectible as an active account because we can file a lien on the property versus how we actually look at the collection process on the electric side. So currently for water and wastewater, we have approximately $2.4 million on the books owed. That's water and wastewater together. Of that amount, 1.35 million is current, which was billed 0 to 30 days. So 56% of it, of that amount, we actually have that may be paid to us.
And in your memo, when you state that in the water and sewer account, that your expectation is that you're going to reduce that figure by 50 to 60%, that's still going to leave you over $1 million in outstanding.
1.04 in uncollected, that is correct.
Okay, so, and I raised this question when you sent the email last week, so I'm just going to get it out there. And I saw in that email the policy, and my question in my correspondence with you is what hard and fast ordinance, if any, do we have that says after X days service is disconnected? We have an ordinance that says after 45 days, notice is posted, and 15 days later service is terminated. Anything like that?
Well, for water, wastewater, there's not. It's a standard operating procedure on how we follow as far as when we bill, when an account is determined to be delinquent, and then when we terminate for water.
So-
In electric, we have to follow the PSC guidelines as far as when we can terminate an account.
Because we're governed by PSC to do so, or because we choose to enroll in that process?
No,
And we're
We're bound
governed.
by
we're
code.
bound by
Code of
code,
Maryland.
yeah, the Code of Maryland.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think you said to me there's 450,000 outstanding in the electric side?
Yeah, actually, it's probably a little less after I've talked to you.
First 4 days of
Right.
layoffs.
After the 125 services
Right.
were disconnected.
Right.
And that's just the number on what you've terminated so far, correct?
Yeah.
On the large front, on the electric side, for final billed accounts, these are accounts that are no longer active in the system that have been removed. We have $2.8 million sitting on the books. Now, that is over a 15-year period, and we continue to calculate that due to the fact that if we do go to the Maryland Public Service Commission, not do, when we go to the Maryland Public Service Commission for any type of rate readjustment or increase, we want to show that amount on our books, and hopefully we can recoup a portion of it through rate base. It's not a guarantee, but we do show that. That's why we go back from 1999 forward and show that amount. So that's actually a receivable 120 days or more in arrears. It averages about $200,000 per year for the amount that gets past that date.
And that number I have in the
carrying.
memo
Yes.
are for active accounts. Mike's including inactive accounts.
I understand that.
Yeah.
So the expectation of getting any or all of that portion of that 2.8 million, you're saying those accounts are no longer active, the meter's been pulled?
No, not necessarily the meter pulled, but it's changed so the account holder is no longer on our system. It could still be active in another name. It's just a customer who is no longer with us.
So why on the electric side don't we do the same thing as we do on the water and sewer side, which is attach the account to the property itself and then place it in tax lien for collection?
We cannot.
Yeah, we cannot do that.
That's the Code of Maryland, where the electric bill is a responsibility of the bill holder and not the property
Property
owner.
owner.
Okay. I mean, just to put that figure of 2.8 million in perspective, that's what we're going to pay our entire electric department in wages, benefit, and overtime next year, correct?
Yes, sir.
About 2.8 million.
Yes, sir.
So that there's an entire year's worth of wages, benefits, and overtime. And the 2.4 million is probably going to be close to what the water and sewer side is.
Projection close, sure.
With a little bit more leverage,
What-
on the water wastewater side.
So are there mechanisms within the PSC that we could put in place that are substantially more hard and fast in terms of ensuring a reduction of that outstanding amount to limit that additional exposure?
I think Scott made an attempt earlier by sending out notices a little bit ahead of time to give
Right.
people an idea what was coming, so we do the pre-notification. It's.
And we deliver 24-hour notices all winter long, so
Right.
they're
Are
balanced.
there things that we can do through legislative action here for this body that would further limit our additional exposure?
I would look and defer to Mr. Boyer how far over the Code of Maryland that we can legislate.
I mean, the expectation of that code clearly can't be that a system provider is set up to basically fail in its ability to collect this degree of debt over time.
Well, to answer the question, we're preempted from passing anything that contradicts Maryland law.
Well, yeah, I understand that part. What I'm saying is there's got to be mechanisms within that code that don't allow for us to continue to be set up to, you know what I mean, for that amount to continue to increase.
I don't have an answer for you. I'm
Well,
not quite sure what you're...
As far as the collection effort goes, we do send accounts to collection attorneys. So we at least can do that. One of the problems we find now is that these account holders they disappear. And, you know, you can ask landlords too. They skip.
Well,
And
but-
you can't, and it's hard to find.
But recently, the attorney's office has started with the skip trace hardware. We just started with that.
Right.
And an ability to try to find some of these people attaching wages, things like that.
Right, and we sometimes find them when they try to come back on our service, and they try to get, they live with somebody else, so they get the service in their name. We now provide, and we have since Beth and I have been doing the job, we ask for a lease, so that we see who is staying in that unit. So if we see that Jane Doe skipped out in 2008 and owes $1,500 bill, Jane Doe now is moving in with Johnny, on Broadway, we can get that. We don't provide service until we get that money that was owed us in 2008.
Is
we're
there
allowed to do that.
Is there a mechanism by which we can limit our exposure on any individual account? In other words, could we set that, you know, that amount doesn't get past a certain period or past a certain level? You know, can you set a maximum on that?
No.
I mean, I'm assuming that you go through that process of disconnection, that the system cannot be set up where you can build up a $4,000 bill over a 5-month period and disappear from
Yes,
it.
you can.
Well, you could, but we're terminating accounts after a first termination notice. Depending on the route. Starting now we can't. Once that termination notice goes out, that's a 14-day notification.
But you said starting now.
April 1st.
There's a moratorium per the PSC,
Yes.
October 31st.
Right, I understand during weather.
Right,
But
so-
you didn't
so-
mean like starting now, like we haven't done that.
Oh, no.
Just
No, April.
I understand that the April 1
Right, so that does
portion is
enable
kicking
them
in.
to build up a large bill.
So we do after that 14 days, if there's been no payment received,
We are disconnected.
we are disconnecting. The only problem with that is that
You could
depending
build
on
up
the numbers.
$3,000 worth of
Correct,
Yeah,
amount over that 5-month period.
correct.
Easily.
easily. Yeah, and we see that now because through the winter with heat.
I mean, I don't know about anybody else sitting here, but for me, I mean, I think that we should take whatever legislative action that we can possibly, to the extent possible, take as a body here, and you know, and argue to the state to limit our exposure. I mean, this number.
And COMAR, of course, limits the deposit amount. We can only collect a certain deposit.
Could I just ask a couple of questions?
question.
What
Yes, sir.
is the deposit?
It's an average of 1/12 of the preceding bill for the 12-month period.
Right.
From that person or that
account.
That
That
account.
That account.
Historical usage on the
Historical
account.
usage.
Right.
That structure of use.
So the next person pays it for the preceding person that was there?
Utilizing the same consumption data.
That's
It's
even though it could
just
be
a usage
completely
of data.
different-
Correct.
Absolutely.
It could, that person, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that could be more, could be less.
Let me raise a couple of issues. First, when I was a kid, I worked for Household Finance. Remember, that was a loan company for 3 years? We made loans, and then we had to collect them. And I thought you guys might be from Household Finance there for a couple of minutes, because it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff as from 40 years ago. You said, Scott, that there were how many accounts outstanding? 270?
Of the ones that we've interrupted service in 4 days, 218.
Okay, so you collected 104 of them, that leaves 114. How long do you anticipate it's going to take to collect the 114, or the greatest number of the 114?
50% are probably vacant. We will move
Yeah.
them out and start collection
I'm
procedures.
sorry, I can't hear you.
50% are probably vacant. So we will move them out, go ahead within 30 days and start collection proceedings, sending them on to the collection.
Okay, so you're going to collect 75 of them, probably.
At
Yes.
some
If,
point,
if,
right.
if they go to the agencies and
Right.
And
try to
then,
get a
and
payment.
then you're going to start collection proceedings against the others.
50 couple.
If they are, I would assume they have to have some kind of, you're not going to go after somebody that owes you $10.
No.
Or-
And to answer that, we utilize different collection agencies.
For
Valley
different
Credit
dollar
does
amounts.
the small dollar amounts.
under 100.
The next one goes to our next collection agency, which basically get 35% average.
Average.
And if it goes to litigation, we lose 50% of it. So it costs us half of what we should be owed just to go after them in the legal,
Right.
and we cannot recoup that money.
Okay, but how long do you follow the bad accounts? I mean, and attempt to collect them? Do you follow them a year or 2 years
No,
or 5 years or 10 years?
They're on the books for 15 years.
15 years.
15 years. And
Yeah.
we attempt to get
16. So-
judgments
Yep.
as much as
And
possible.
And we have denied service to
Quite a few.
people coming in that have owed us a bill that's 10 years old. We've denied service until that bill is paid.
Okay.
The other issue we have that we have to be concerned about of those 114, and which will grow over time, are those that don't pay, but yet turn themselves or has someone else turn them back on without our knowledge.
Yeah, I didn't understand that in the email either, that,
Yep.
that people were turning themselves back
Yep.
on.
Yep, and
Cut the seal and turn the meter back
yeah,
on.
they will cut the seal and they will.
So what proceeding do we take against folks that do
Criminal
that?
charge, that's theft.
Well, what we do is we go out, once we see that there's consumption, and we'll go out and check these accounts. We'll have a list on Friday, and
Right.
we'll go out.
Trust me, I understand the
Yeah, the
process.
staff goes out every Friday,
Pulls the
on
meter
Mike's
if it's
staff.
back on.
And if it's back on, they'll pull the meter, and the service gets cut at the pole. And that's,
You
of
don't
course,
do
an added
anything to the
expense.
individual that
Yes,
That
and
turn it back.
this is where it falls on the
Right.
property owner if it's a rental. We require an electrical inspection for any meter, any socket that's been tampered with. So there is a financial detriment to someone who does tamper with any of our services.
How much is that fee?
Unfortunately, what it's going to be to get a licensed electrician to come in, then you have to make the permit to the permits office, then George has to come out. So there's a cost, $200, $250 to get it redone. Unfortunately, it falls back to the property owner 90% of the time if it's a renter, that someone tampered with the meter. But
Right.
it's our heavy-handedness to try to keep people from tampering with the meter and putting themselves back on.
Now, you might mention, what's the total number of electric accounts?
Active accounts right now is 17,100 and something like that. It fluctuates, 17.1, 17.3, just like people skipping on us and whatever.
and the total accounts that you have scheduled for cutoff is 220, 218?
We've been doing about 50, 55, 60 a day for 4 days, 55 or so a day.
And
But that was the total number coming into April 1 was 218?
Oh,
no.
Okay, that's the number
That's
I
just
got a
what
little-
we've
That's just what we've
terminated.
terminated
What they've
since.
already done.
So what's the total number? Because I thought that was your question.
That's what I thought
Oh,
it was too.
you're-
No, that's why I said that number's way low.
The
What's
total number that are eligible for termination,
About 2,200.
yeah, I'd say about 2,200, 2,300.
So about 15% of the account base.
Yeah. And that's over the winter.
Okay,
And that's what
so-
accumulates over the winter.
So
Will that
it's
be-
not just those 50 accounts then?
Right, what will that be at the end of summer?
Oh, it'll be, I'd say
I'd say at least, if we go down by 50%.
at least
half
half.
of that.
So you got
At least
1,000
half.
accounts, and you
It'll
just
be
said you send
1,100.
those to a
1,000.
collection agency, and out of that 1,000 accounts you're sending to a collection entity, you're only capturing 35% of that, so you're writing off 600 bad accounts a year.
In quick math, that would be correct.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
That would be our loss per year.
And all I'm saying is we need a mechanism to whatever extent we could possibly do, and this is just one member speaking, maybe everybody else has a different
Yeah.
idea about this, to limit our exposure to that from this point forward.
That sounds like state legislative
Yeah,
process.
electric is definitely, electric is definitely more of a challenge because you don't have that leverage of a lien type process as you do with water and wastewater
Well,
against
you
the
can't
property owner.
disconnect it in the winter.
And you
You have
can't,
no mill.
yeah, and the restrictions that are placed in the wintertime, to
Sounds
actually
like an
doing
unfunded
termination.
mandate
Supply
to
of
me.
electricity.
Yeah, but I'm assuming you communicate with other jurisdictions that have electric utility that they provide. I mean, and I guess I'm curious if we could reach out, not just MML, but some of those other jurisdictions that may have done things or may be doing things, you know, that may assist in that.
And fortunately for us, as a municipal electric utility, the parameters are different for our operations versus a Potomac Edison or a BG&E or a Pepco.
Correct.
When you're under 40,000 customers, you fall under a different set of rules. Their rules are actually much more stringent, and their arrearages are greater than ours, the issues that they have. We've been on work
Percentage-wise,
teams
they're
with them.
huge.
They are handcuffed even further than we are. And when you go to the Maryland Public Service Commissions, there's a great animosity specifically with BG&E. And that's where we kind of get lost in the shuffle sometimes, is the issues that they have that become maybe more or less personal and how they.
Well, in responding, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is, for good or for bad, that the state has made a decision, like with medical care, that utilities are going to subsidize folks that are poor.
Yes, sir, we socialize the cost.
Yes, sir.
And we do, and I'm
That's
assuming that's
accurate.
what we're talking about here.
Yes, sir.
That's right.
And so I, for one, if I had the power to turn somebody's electric off when it's 0 degrees out, does that mean I would do it? I wouldn't. And I don't know what else what you're seeking seems to me is shortening that time that we're required not to turn their power off. And my guess is this is just a policy decision that the state has made, that whether you're a private or a public utility, you're going to subsidize power to those folks.
Well, and along that line, the tendency, and last year we were very concerned with a bill that was floated that would have made it even harder for us to cut in the summer. Right now, if it's 95 or above, forecasted over 72 hours, we cannot terminate service. The legislature wanted to drop that to 90 degrees or above. And if that would have happened, we would have probably only been able to do any type of action maybe a total of 15 days last summer.
Well, then
Which
the
would have
state-
give
then
it
the
a couple
state-
years
yeah.
and you won't be able to cut it off
Which
at
would
all.
have-
Yeah, then the state needs to send some of our tax dollars
Right.
back here so
Right.
we can handle the misgivings that we are getting, okay?
Yep.
How many
Because-
other municipalities have their own electric light?
There are 5 total in Maryland, and we are the largest.
And I would imagine that the private corporations get to write off their losses, whereas we don't get to
Their
write that
accounting
off.
practices are probably different than us. I doubt if they carry it on their books for the arrearages as long as we do.
What,
Well, we probably need to move on. I don't think we're going to solve it unless you have.
I don't, a couple of things. First, I mean, I disagree with Kristen. I think what I'm hearing you say is good work, very good work.
Thank you.
No matter how hard you try, there are going to be people out there who are going to game the system all they can. And there are those legitimate people who can't afford to pay the bills. I know when I was in my previous office, I had dozens of people come to me, maybe hundreds over the years, with complaints. And I always worked with you all, and you always worked hard to resolve those issues, and I always appreciated that. And I don't want to take any more flexibility away from you. I think that you need flexibility to handle these issues. But I have one thing that's slightly off the subject, but it's still electrical related. Beth, I hope you know the answer to this. You may recall that Danny contacted, I suppose you, I'm not sure, your office anyhow, not long ago on a constituent case I had involving someone in Frederick Manor.
Mm-hmm.
And someone, perhaps it was you again, provided me with a great deal of supporting documentation. But what I'm interested in knowing, because I have not followed up on it, because I want to have this conversation first, is anybody went out and visited the lady and looked at her problems one more time?
That's where in Frederick Manor. They
At
tested
Frederick
the
Manor.
meters, and I believe there was some, the maintenance people from Frederick Manor had mislabeled meters, and there were some mismarkings on the meters out in Frederick Manor. And I think that they're working on some billing adjustments.
We've made the adjustments and credited the accounts monetarily.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
We credited the accounts monetarily. I can tell you the customer where that would have been charged more, we did waive that. It was amounted to a couple $100. And then we did rebate the overcharge back to the other customer. So it was,
Also, there was some stealing of electricity?
no, the meters were just mislabeled wrong when it came. One customer was paying for one for another, and the usage were vastly
Okay,
different.
but now it's straightened out.
It is straightened out, and
It's
we,
been
In spite of the
corrected.
fact that she lost her subsidy from CAC, is she the one?
She would have needed to go back and reapply, which I told her she needed
Which
to.
she
go to
did.
I will follow through and make sure she did, but she
Okay,
was told.
I'm
to.
asking you, yeah, I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Okay, if it's straightened out, it's straightened out, good, thank you.
Just 2 quick questions. One, to your knowledge, has this, within the last 5 or 10 years, been in front of the General Assembly as a bill, as a significant bill, and/or in front of the PSC, this issue of collection, to your knowledge?
The only thing the only legislation I know of was what I sat on the task force as far as the termination of water service if in an apartment building. If an owner is delinquent on paying their water bill, you can go in and shut that service off and the tenants are evicted. And I know what the PSC was looking into was the ability for the tenants then to take over the accounts from the property owner and then pay the water so that service could continue. I don't think that went anywhere though.
But on the electric side,
I sat on the task force 3 years ago where they actually extended the moratorium. This was in regard, basically it was a BG&E Pepco issue where we had that it was a really cold winter.
Yeah.
People's accounts had become so far in arrears, they actually worked out through the PSC payment plans that all of the investor-owned utilities had to follow. I, as the largest municipality, put the documentation together and allowed us to become not a part of that. Wrote a letter, did some testifying in front of the PSC. We got out of that because our policy that we had already superseded what the other IOUs had been doing. So that was the last one that I was involved in.
Right.
But we talked about, Scott mentioned the 72 hours for the termination. That's only been with us now for 3 or 4 years.
3 years.
That was just 24 hours. That really limited us. When you have to look at 3 consecutive days of temperatures, either not going above 32 or the 95, that cut us back immensely in how we do our collections.
Especially the winter affidavits to cut off.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
And is there any industry one-pager or easy to follow about the consequences, the losses, the financial impact on the investor-owned utilities, to your knowledge? I mean, you don't have to answer that now. If there's something quick, I'd just be curious what the magnitude of what they're going through, if anything, but, not so I can, because, Chris, it is a subject of concern. People just walk out on bills. It's part of, you need to have responsibility. I feel sorry for people. At the same time, responsibility, so often it's a matter of responsibility and not truly of not being able to pay. So it works both ways. So I'm just kind of curious about how the impact and the percentage impact on the more common form of utility, the investor-owned utilities. But, when you get a chance.
Okay. And before we leave this subject, we focused a lot on the electric, but you said you got $2.5 million in outstanding water and sewer utility debt. That I think you said at the end of the summer it'll be a little over $1 million.
The 2.4 million, that includes what's owed currently, which is 0 to 30 days. Anything that's in arrears 30 days or greater, that's $1.04 million.
Okay, and so how long do we allow a water and sewer account to go before we terminate service?
21 days is when a bill is due. A termination notice will go out within the next 5 days after that.
Okay.
And then they have 15
And then they
days to
have
pay.
15 days to pay.
Or service is terminated.
Well, service may be terminated depending on the number. Because
And depending on the weather, in the wintertime, we
Right.
have a hard time disconnecting water. We don't want pipes to freeze and bust,
Right.
do damage to someone's property.
That isn't paying their bill.
Okay.
One more, 2 more.
Go ahead.
Do you have some fair idea of who the people are who are trying to cheat the system? I mean, when I worked for household finance, I knew that after a while that these were going to be problems over and over and over.
Oh, we
know
sure.
those.
You
Yes,
see
I
the
do.
same
So you
names.
keep an eye on them, I
Right.
presume.
Oh, I,
Yeah.
Consistently.
And the bottom line here is that you're talking responsibility, and if you just go in and you see, if something can be worked, they're willing to work.
Yeah.
And that's what really frustrates me, because when I see a person say, oh, I can't pay this, well, yeah, but you can go to McDonald's, you're smoking a pack of cigarettes. I just get very frustrated, okay?
We
Very
all-
frustrated.
We all do.
Well, thank you for enlightening us on this very important and difficult issue. And I'm sure individual council members will follow up with you as questions arise. And
Sure.
as we float ideas of possible solutions.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Next item on the agenda is an update on the impact of the excise tax ordinance and adequate public facilities ordinance on city development. Ms. Kathy Marr, our planning director, is here with us.
Hello.
Thank you for the very informative memo.
Yes, I hadn't anticipated that I would be doing much of a presentation today. I put this together for your information because I knew you planned to have a discussion about the APFO as a result of recent revisions to the excise tax. As I stated in the memo, on March 26th, the county commissioners adopted revisions to the excise tax that reduces the tax rate on retail and residential development. The city's ability to retain the county excise tax is tied to our adoption and continued use of an adequate public facilities ordinance for schools. The city's APFO allows us to review periodically whether there is a continuing need for the ordinance and allows us to repeal the ordinance if the mayor and city council determine that retention of the ordinance has become detrimental to the ability of the city to administer its policies and goals affecting growth and redevelopment in the city. If the city were to take that step, however, of repealing the ordinance, we would no longer be eligible to retain 28% of the excise tax collected within the city. It's been a number of years since I looked into what we are enabled to, the types of taxes we're enabled to impose on development. So I don't know whether if we would be able to adopt our own excise tax. I have heard it stated, though, a number of times over the years that we cannot as long as the county has an excise tax. But I couldn't tell you if that's true.
Right, but we could adopt an impact fee.
Yes, which is a somewhat less flexible type of a tax than the excise tax. So this is just a report about the relationship between the excise tax and the APFO, the impact of the excise tax for our revenues as well as on development, the impact of the APFO on development since we adopted it in 2006, and various other data just so that you would have an awareness of these issues as you discuss whether or not to continue with an APFO or to repeal it.
And it's a little hard to sort out in some of these cases, although technically certain projects are not meeting the APFO test because the capacity hasn't been built. We don't know if those, even if it was there, whether that, given these economic conditions, whether that project would indeed move forward, right?
Right. Most of the tests that did not pass were back at the tail end of the boom.
Yeah.
And so even if they had passed, whether they would have moved forward, it's hard to say. Of the ones that we got the revitalization clause approval for, one of them, the PUD, is expired because nothing happened. One of them has been replaced by the library project. And one of them, the one that's still conceivably alive, a downtown project, is stalled because of financial issues right now. So there were a lot of things that came into play over the last 6 years that would have had an impact on development decisions. The APFO would not be the only reason that things would have or would not have moved forward. But we have had 2 projects come forward within the last year that have proposed for apartment development at Collegiate Acres that have been stalled because of Morgansville Elementary School's overcapacity. And North High has capacity, but not a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I understand. I was here when we did the APFO, and you know, we did the APFO for a good reason. Think of what it's all about. So we want to get rid of it because the county has decided in these bad economic times they're not going to do an excise tax. So we get rid of the APFO, and the boom starts up again. It just, I mean, first of all, me, with or without an excise tax, I'm not a real firm believer in having development exceed the capacity of the schools that they're in. And I understand then you get to say, well, then the school board's controlling development in the city, or is the city controlling how the school board's developed? I only know one thing. We passed this APFO at a time when, if we didn't learn anything else, we should have learned this, that growth can very quickly exceed infrastructure. And as bad as the bad economic times are, I remember, Penny, you and I campaigning when it was Boomtown. And when what the problem was we were starting to look like Montgomery County and Frederick County with traffic and with developments. And we want to mall out on two more shopping malls that would have been now, if they would have been built, probably would have been ghost towns by now. But I don't have any regret nor any reason to say that we should get rid of something that says we aren't going to allow growth to exceed our capacity. If we get to that point, my guess is if we get to that point where that's happening, the county's going to put the excise tax back in place. And the other thing is, so we get rid of the APFO and then we do an impact fee. Well, the county doesn't have the excise tax, we have the impact fee, and we're not going to get growth that way anyway. So we're just preventing that growth. So I'm not one who believes we should get rid of the APFO.
Well, I'm a strong believer in adequate public facilities tests, especially for schools and roads. Those are the two key areas. But I'm also a strong believer in development fees. The public builds roads, the public builds all kinds of improvements. The people who own the land when it was worth nothing get, without any contributing anything, get huge increases in value. One problem is, though, the people that pay the excise tax often are the people down the road, and the original owners still get that yield that is undeserved and unfair in most cases. They just happen to own the land where the public spent huge amounts of money, made a lot of money, do nothing. And so I believe in excise tax, I believe in impact fees, I believe in adequate public facilities. However, I don't like to be beholden to somebody else, and that to some extent, I think we've got to proceed with caution here. And I don't like to be beholden to somebody else for what we can do. And if the school capacity is manipulated in that way, that can happen.
Right.
And if that happens, then we need to be ready to move. So we need research or getting caught up on what we can do and what our options are, I think, so that we could move quickly if indeed, I mean, the county commissioners, several of them assured me personally, oh, that doesn't mean we won't build the schools and they aren't a big part of the revenues and all that sort of thing. But number one, those groups of people change too.
Right.
So, you know, I think we need to be careful, and we need to be careful that things aren't done that affect us in negative ways when we have a good project on the line. And so I think we have to watch it. Whether we would, another thing we don't know is if we had our own impact fee and or excise tax if allowed, what those revenues might be compared to the county. And as Lou just said, then you get into the old hat of, well, developers are going to be reluctant because there's a fee there and not out in the county. I don't know whether the commissioners will, or some future group of commissioners, when they actually have to start paying for a lot of improvements because development's moving forward, that's when the real pressure comes. How are we going to pay for this? Right now, the pressure's off.
And that's because there's no pressure to build.
Yeah, but it's sort of an ideological thing too. So at the moment, but the real pressure comes when you have to make that CIP work.
No, right, and I would add, when we talk about this, that the school board, I mean, when you see what the schools that have been built and are being built in the last recent years, I mean, you go look at Pangborn, you look at Bester, it's not like the school board isn't focusing and hasn't been focusing on city schools.
You're correct. As a matter of fact, the school board doesn't depend on excise taxes to build
Right.
schools.
Right.
And I just want to make the comment, I agree with you fully. I think you're absolutely on target. We implemented this because it took care of a difficult problem which is likely to reappear in possibly no time at all.
I think Kathy's memo, though, points out, is there enough capacity at the West End Elementary? Is there enough capacity? You know,
I think the question's bigger than that, and we didn't just implement this because of school capacity issues.
No,
We implemented this. We implemented this with a fee associated with it to address the increase in growth associated with infrastructure needs. School being one of those, and we had a system in place. We agreed for an APFO consistent with the county's APFO than all of the municipalities. Not an APFO, but an APFO consistent with the counties. They're two hugely different scenarios of not having one at all and having one that is exactly the same as an entity that controls the process. Two hugely different things. And when you look at that and you boil it down, a couple of things folks seem not to remember is that 50% of the schools are in or impacted by city growth. And of that, there have been at least 2, 3 redistricting processes which have continually moved that enrollment into these schools where no city growth has happened, continuing to push those schools over the limit, requiring that reconstruction and expansion to occur. So not only do we then forego any element of approach in simply school construction, but we're impacted, and developments within the city then are impacted by redistricting. And so I don't think that it is as simple as saying, you know, Bester Elementary rebuilt because of overcapacity. I mean, there's clearly growth pressures that occurred that had nothing to do with a single house being built in the Bester School District, which we will now forego by watching a reduction in funding, which will remove $10 million from the 10-year budget.
Right, I understand all that, but my issue with the question is not to sound too bad about it, but right now I don't see a problem that needs to be fixed. If somebody's coming to us and telling us that we aren't having growth because of the APFO, I totally agree with you. We have the absolute right to change this, amend this, but I think we have so many other things on our table right now.
Then I suggest we take the proposed expenditures in the budget that is associated directly with excise tax being expended on it and remove those projects from our budget.
Well, if there's not a funding source for them, we're not going to have them, are we?
No, we need to revise the estimates within the CIP. I don't think that means we should throw out a project. We should look at how that project should be funded. Same as anything else.
We were presented 2 months ago with a budget that wasn't balanced. Now we're removing a funding mechanism. I don't know how else you simply say we're going to fund other projects or move money around to do it, other than simply removing the projects from the budget.
Well, usually the impact fee is a part of a project. I mean, if it's a good project, we should look at whether we should remove it or not. I mean,
well, I think the answer clearly is if the funding source is not available, then the budget's going to have to be revised. I mean, that's pretty obvious. You either got to find another way to pay for it, or you got to get rid of it. But I think that's part of the budget process, and we're going to have to address it. But I don't know that the APFO has a bearing on whether or not we're going to get the excise tax money.
Kathy, I want to say before you leave the table that I read this very carefully last night because there were lots of issues that I didn't understand. And I thought that you had done a really good job of summarizing those issues in an understandable way. So thank you for that. And I'm glad you didn't make a recommendation about where to move on this, because I think, again, that Lou's absolutely right about it.
Yeah, I didn't feel it was my place to make a recommendation. It was the elected body that decided to adopt a city APFO for county service, so I figured it was the role of the elected body to decide whether to continue or to repeal.
Again, though, I like APFOs, but I also think excise taxes are a good thing, and I also think it leads to places that Christian's referring to of the public really losing in this process. But they've done it. Right now, I can't see. I think we have the option of doing this whenever we want to. So we ought to see how this develops and how they meet. I think the redistricting thing, thank you, Kristen, for bringing up the redistricting, because that is a problem and that is an issue, and we probably as a city ought to get into that.
Although at times the redistricting improves capacity at city schools, like the Rockland Woods, the associated redistricting with Rockland Woods improved the situation for the schools that serve the southern part of the city.
Right, but there's other ones, which I won't go into right now, but there are issues. I'm well aware of them. I've told some school board members, so let's see.
it's an elected school board. They can make decisions with which we disagree,
Well,
and they do.
Well, they do, yeah. But Kristen's right. I mean, when they we need to look at it more closely.
It sounds like we don't have a consensus to take any action today. It's certainly something that we need to continue to keep an eye on. And like Marty said, we can come back to it at any time. I do appreciate all the information that was contained in the memo, because I do think it lays out the issue pretty clearly. And I agree with what Marty and with what Kristen and with what Lewis said. And I think, you know, it's a hard pill to swallow. And I guess the question comes down to, is the juice worth the squeeze, and how much would we be losing out on if we were to remove our APFO by foregoing that 28%. I mean, if you're talking about 28% of $100,000, you know, if $100,000 is the 28%, it's not that much. But again, if we start to grow and have a boom time, then you know, the county may likely revise their policy. So I think the best action at this time is probably no action.
Can we ask Kathy, and I did not ask her the question until shortly before the meeting, about what the municipal legal capabilities were in that area. I remember that there was stuff about that from years ago when that came up, but I don't want to guess. I don't want to guess. I want to know. So if we could have an update on our options, I would appreciate a paper. I don't know that we have to meet on it right now, but I would appreciate knowing what our options are.
Please.
Sure.
Thank you.
And of similar quality, as Don said. Thank you. It was a good paper.
And we've been reading that there have been residential surges in other parts of the country. We have not started experiencing that yet, apart from the 2 site plans at Collegiate Acres that I mentioned earlier.
And it may be that we have projects that are focused more on retirees, or, you know, the artist live workspace, which, you know, may not have a school impact. Certainly those impact other public facilities, but there is a process for getting approval from the county in that
And we also still have quite a number of units in the pipeline that are approved that have not been built yet.
And I think that's an important point. There can still be development based on that prior pipeline.
Particularly at Hager's Crossing and Collegiate Acres. They have the largest supply yet to be built.
All right, thank you. We'll go on to the sale of city real property, the competitive negotiated sales process.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. We had put together a brief memo based upon some earlier discussions with this body about how we go about advertising and selling properties. And we were directed to advertise the public square property. And as Aaron will navigate through the website, we've added the old Midtown Motel to this process. And essentially, there's information, for example, if you pull up the Midtown at 170 West Washington Street, we include a photo, brief description of the property, and there's an application form. And what we're asking for is for an applicant to lay out their vision and their ability to carry out a project at the property. Aaron has now pulled up the public square property, and on this one we had floor plans as well. We've reviewed this process in terms of the workflow, if you will, with City Attorney Mark Boyer, and Mr. Boyer's expressed he's comfortable with this process in terms of soliciting proposals from people on an ongoing basis, with the addition of one aspect, and that's for properties that we purchased many years ago under Chapter 43 and then subsequently under Chapter 42 of the City Code, that we purchased properties in the 90s. And the addition we have to add for those properties is also posting an advertisement in a local newspaper. And we can do that and direct people back to this website, and then be in compliance with the requirements of the ordinances that we purchased the properties from. So far, we've had people express interest in both the Public Square property, and we've had interest expressed in the former Midtown Motel, both from a nonprofit, but also a for-profit business has expressed interest. So the basics are that someone outlines their vision and their ability, and then we are utilizing the same staff committee we use for the PEP committee that have used applications for the PEP program. Those members are the community development manager, that's John Kearns, the inspections manager, Paul Falk, planning director, Kathy Marr, and the finance director, Michelle Berker. So we have a well-rounded pool of talent and insight there to look at it from a financial aspect, a planning aspect, a code aspect, and then a development aspect. And then if we have an applicant that it looks as if they can pull off a good project in line with the city's vision, then we would refer that to you, the same as we have in the past in terms of selling properties, such as 140 South Potomac Street. And so we've developed this based upon discussions with this body and looking at some best practices around the country. And we're here if anybody has questions or comments. And I guess the other input we would seek is whether or not this body wants us to list other properties or come back with detailed information about other properties, such as the Roslyn building.
The Alms House, the Central Lot. I think put all of them on there. That's what I would suggest.
It's kind of like an ongoing RFP process.
And of course, we'd return to mayor and council with any proposed acquisition by a private
Yes.
or public body.
Absolutely.
Ms. Nye was questioning me about the Alms House. She said it's historic, and I said I understand that, but I do think it could still be adaptively reused.
Yeah, it could have been.
And we're hoping that would
Not to
be
take
the
it
case.
down.
Right. No, I don't think it should be taken down. I think we should get it back on the tax rolls, I think would be the best situation.
Staff could prepare detailed information on those properties and list them here on the site. And again, any properties that we bought back in the 90s under those other ordinances, we would have the additional step of an advertisement in the local paper.
John, did you say that Midtown was people that were looking at that?
Yes.
A nonprofit?
We've been approached by both a nonprofit and a for-profit entity. We haven't received an application yet, but we've been approached by one of each.
But how many properties besides City Hall does the city own? Do you know off the top of your head?
I do not know off the top of my head. In terms of for things like this, on the community development side, we own 2 duplexes that we're trying to sell, both of those on Jonathan Street. And we have the Alms House, the Roslyn building, the Elizabeth Hager Center, the CVS building, which houses the university system. And then our recent acquisition of the Midtown and our pending acquisition of 4353.
And the 3640.
And 3640, yes, sir.
How many of these private entities do we currently have loan relationships with?
Private entity, which private entities?
Private properties or entities.
I'm not sure I understand your question. In terms of how many of them do we?
Well, like the building we own next
whom?
door that we had a loan out to Rockies for, or the Demcor properties, or other properties around downtown that we have some financial, direct financial relationship with.
But not necessarily ones that the city owns.
That actually on the agenda next week is to have a recap, an overview of our city loan programs, and we'll be able to answer that more directly. Right. But I would say that a lot of the redevelopment of downtown, the city has had a hand in projects, whether they were public and private partnerships or public partnerships, or just through our loan program. So the city has been instrumental in the vast majority of the revitalization efforts.
I'm just curious which mechanism has been more successful. In other words, you take the Academy Theater or, you know, the School for the Arts, others that we don't retain a long-term financial interest in, but rather sell it outright through some type of you know, vetted process similar to, you know, I guess we call that the Academy Theater, the old building in the central lot. So
that's something that we can take a look at. I believe that planning has a document for how long we held various properties, but it's from what we've heard from the direction from this body is that the goal is to move the properties back into private hands, and this effort is to make sure that that occurs in a timely fashion.
And a systematic fashion. So
yes, sir.
You can at least start to do apples to apples
yes,
instead of apples to oranges if you use a procedure.
Correct, sir.
And the public really needs to understand that the highest bid for a place or the highest dollar offer isn't always or often isn't the best deal for the city. We need long-term guarantees, long-term implications, and the best reuse of the structure, et cetera, et cetera. And just a price, it just could be somebody ready to flip it and hold it.
Right.
And that's not what we want. Now, it's very difficult to hold people to the stuff they say in these applications. And that's where I think, I'm just throwing that out, I'm not asking for guarantees because you can't make them. But to the extent we can sort out the wheat from the chaff is so big, and to the extent we can, as we work through doing these, we can build that in somehow, because it's just so often you'll get all the promises up front, and the papers we sign won't get the deal done.
And I think the process that we developed in conjunction with the city attorney's office on 140 South Potomac Street serves as a good example for how to get it done. And because we had a development agreement that was built into the contract, as well as we have restrictions on use of the property for 10 years. So we've looked at how other communities have done it. We've looked at some missteps that we've had in the past, and have said, how is it that we can avoid those, and how is it that we can have as tight of a process? And we've gotten good advice from Mr. Boyer and Mr. Nairn on tightening up those agreements.
So the process would be, we would advertise, everybody would get the same form.
The application's available online.
It would be available by X date, blah, blah, blah.
And the way we have the review set up is to review the first week of a month, and then to bring recommendations to the body if we have something that has merit. And I think that was the direction we received, was that instead of bringing every application to the council, applications that had merit, we would bring to the council.
And is it your sense that these would be public documents or privately held that we would need to meet in executive session? I'm not making a value judgment either way.
I think it depends, and there's some aspects where folks can ask that things are held in confidence.
I'm afraid that if they're public documents, we drive people away.
Often when we're in a negotiation prior to entering into a contract, those documents can be protected up until execution of a contract or consummation of a deal.
Right. Oh, well, okay, I'm glad you mentioned that, negotiations. Negotiations, okay. So to what extent do we pick a favored person from these, and then we negotiate further, but negotiating further, really, the other people haven't had a chance to have that happen. So what is the legal implication of that?
Well, I don't think there's a legal implication. I think what you've identified is probably a practical problem if you get down the road in a negotiation and you don't get what you expect.
Well, or somebody promises the moon and bait and switch. Somebody promises the moon and backs off of it in negotiation.
Well, I don't think we are required in this. It's not like a typical RFP situation where you open the sealed bids and you make your decision. It's an ongoing process, so I think we would go back to the other applicants on that,
No, it is like an RFP. It's not like a bid. The bid's where you open bids. An RFP, you do look at them, and it's not based on price.
But we don't have the time, I guess we don't have the time considerations where, if we've told some applicants or not told some applicants that they're no longer under consideration, I don't think there's any prohibition to going back to other applicants if we felt they had merit.
Right. Well, I like the systematizing and doing that, but I think we're just going to have to constantly be improving and trying to tighten it and all that.
Is there no asking price when you list these properties? You're simply asking them to propose a purchase price?
Yes, and I think a lot depends on what it is they're looking to do. If someone is proposing to acquire property and have minimal investment in it, then acquisition price would likely have to be higher than someone who may be putting $1 million into a project.
And I'm not saying there should be an asking price. I was just wondering.
Yes.
How that works. But then the tricky part is making that $1 million happen after we sign.
And then I think the process we have set up here is we're accepting these on a rolling basis. We find a winner. Someone comes in with an asking price and combination of vision that we really enjoy. That we think this will be a great fit for the downtown. We bring it to you guys. It's and the mayor and council then said we pull it then from the website. And we say we're not accepting any more applications on that. Then, like in the very bottom of the program overview, we say that then we're authorized to negotiate a purchase agreement consistent with the application. We'll do our best to accomplish that. And then if that doesn't happen, it lights back up on the website and we go again. But I think it seems to me like that kind of a process would make the most sense.
And how are we advertising again?
On the website. And for some of the properties, we'll have an ad, particularly in the paper, identifying that particular property. But I would also call on Aaron to make sure that we're getting the word out through our other media contacts, and we can put together YouTube videos and have it on Facebook and get the word out, as well as through our business contacts and direct outreach to the development community. And I can tell you that just talking about acquiring 43 to 53 West Washington, we had developers call us asking whether or not they would be able to meet with us. Having this process provides a vehicle for them to put their thoughts in writing.
Well, I think this is a step in the right direction, for sure, in that regard. And I'd like to see all city-owned property up on the website just to see who's got some ideas out there.
So where are we going to meet when they sell City Hall?
I'm not saying City Hall's for sale, but certainly our lot, this lot could be redeveloped. That'd be fine with me. The Rossum, I mean, there's at least a handful of these properties, so better on the tax rolls than not.
So okay to expand the list then, beyond the two that we've got on there, Midtown and
I think so.
Public Square.
Not the
Okay.
house.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Funding request for the Maryland Theater sound system upgrade.
Yes, this evening, Benito is here from the Maryland Theater and Mr. Hovis from the Office of Community Grant Management from the county, should there be any questions.
And also Jessica Green, the operations
Jessica
manager.
Green's here as well, also from the Maryland Theater. It's a short memo. The Maryland Theater had submitted an application to the Office of Grant Management with the county, or Community Grant Management. That office has indicated they're willing to fund this project for upgrade of the sound system by 50% of the project cost. And the request here today is whether the city is able to handle the remaining balance of that, which is $22,411 approximately. And should the mayor and council desire or find it proper to do that. The funds would be taken from the current fiscal year net revenue in the general fund. And again, staff from the Maryland Theater and Office of Community Grant Management are here should you have questions.
Thumbs up if you approve. All right.
That was my finger.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. That was easy.
Good to see you.
It's a pleasure helping the Maryland Theater.
Can't wait
Keep
to
up the
come
good
and hear
work.
the new system.
Yeah, no, thank you for all your support. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Ray.
He doesn't have his mic on. I think Marty's got his mic.
Let's take a 5-minute break while we have 2 members who are already away from the table. Continue our discussion of the FY 13-14 budget, and I'm going to turn it over to Team Michelle's.
Okay, I wanted to go ahead and get started in section 3 for the general fund. If you just turn to page 1, I'll go over just some of the summary information there, as well as a couple of the other important pages that I think you should be aware of in this section. Just going through the revenues by type at the top there of the page. Property taxes are expected to remain pretty flat over fiscal year 13's estimated actual. A little bit of a reduction over the 13 budget just based on the unexpected decrease in personal property tax for corporations. State and county shared revenues are expected to come in a little bit higher than fiscal year 13. It's due to the partial restoration of state aid for police protection of $234,000 and a slight increase in income tax of about $100,000 that we're probably going to see in fiscal year 14. Licenses and permits are expected to remain flat. Intergovernmental revenues are expected to increase. It's due to our COPS hiring grant. We have $244,000 included in fiscal year 14 for hiring of 5 officers in the police department. It's a 3-year grant. We're expected to retain those additional 5 officers for additional 2 years after that, so it's basically a 5-year grant. Charges for current services expected to remain flat. Fines and forfeitures, we are expecting an increase in that. It's due to our Safe Speed for Students program that was implemented in fiscal year 12. Fiscal year 13's estimated actual for Safe Speed for Students is about $1.3 million. The original budget was $730,000. Fiscal year 14, we're expecting that to increase to $1.6 million. It's about $828,000 over the original budget for fiscal year 13. Unallocated general revenues, we're expecting that to decrease slightly. It's due to a one-time revenue source that we received in fiscal year 13 that resulted from the sale of corporate stock. We should not have that type of expenditure in the future. Transfers from other funds are expected to increase. We are expecting to have about $250,000 from the water fund due to the water fund dividend that we will hopefully look at in fiscal year 14. And there is an additional $55,000 from the health insurance fund for the wellness program that was approved earlier this year. As far as expenditure go, most of the expenditures have remained fairly flat. All of our operating departments have done a great job at keeping expenditures flat for us. The increases you'll see are down in the police and fire department. The police department is increasing as a result of the 5 police officers that we mentioned earlier due to the COPS hiring grant, as well as a school resource officer and an enforcement officer in the speed camera department. The fire department is increasing as a result of the restoration of 3 battalion chiefs in fiscal year 13, so we'll see that number increasing. It's all wages and benefits in both of those departments. We have some slight decreases in our highways and streets. It's due to reductions in chemicals as well as electrical costs due to historical trends that we've seen over the last few years. Waste collection and disposal is expected to remain flat. In Parks and Recreation, city parks, we're expecting to see an increase there because we've added several parks in fiscal year 13 and fiscal year 14. Just 3 of those are the Greenwald Park, Memorial Park, and the Kiwanis Park that are expected to come online in the next few months or have already come online recently. And those are associated with the operating costs for those 3 new parks. The reduction we have for the municipal stadium is a result of not completing the music project. We had included operating costs in fiscal year 13 for music and potential adjustments to the lease as a result of music, and that was not included. So we were able to reduce the stadium costs back down to historical trends for fiscal year 14. Do I have any questions about this first page here? Sure.
Just one quick question. I note the municipal stadium change, and I understand the difference in operating costs for music. Is this the only section of the budget in which costs associated with the municipal stadium are included?
This, for operating costs, there would have been costs associated in CIP. This is just operating strictly.
Okay.
And I have a question. Maybe to show my ignorance, but the very first line, it looks like our proposed property tax revenue is higher than last year's, but we're showing a negative 1.7% decrease.
It's budget to budget. Our budget originally was $2.9 million. Our estimated actuals 24.9. Estimated actuals 24.4.
So it was from the 24,897
to the 24,474.
Okay, thank you.
It's budget to budget.
I'll run this page. If I could just put in a plug. We've made progress in restoring unfunded positions in police and fire, but one I would just encourage us to not lose sight of is in public works, where they actually have a higher percentage of their total staff unfunded than in police and fire. It's been several years since of operations for public works without a position. So if we get to the point of a willingness or a consideration of restoring additional positions, I'd just like to put in a plug for also considering public works as well as police and fire. I think it's something that we would like to discuss with Mayor and Council at some point in the future.
And I want to put in a plug for all of us who, and I am one of them, who thinks that our city needs more people out there taking care of the dirt, more than just inspectors. I mean, there was a day when I remember I used to see people on the street with the vacuum cleaners.
Downtown cleanup
downtown cleaning. I drive on the street now, I look out and, block of Jonathan, it looks like people are just emptying their ashtrays on the street.
In parking.
Having said that, I believe we need more staff, and I don't believe this budget allows for more staff without either cutting other bare bones things or finding a methodology to fund those no positions. And I'm not aware of too many methods to do it other than consideration of raising taxes. And I'm also concerned very much when we get to listening to the out years about the realism of whether this administration is going to be able to go 4 years without any type of a tax rate increase.
Okay. If we turn the page there, I'll just finish up the summary section on expenditures. Economic and community development expected to remain pretty flat. Retiree benefits are expected to increase, and that's a result of 12.1% increase in health insurance benefits that we're expecting in fiscal year 14.
You mean charges for benefits?
Charges for benefits, yes.
Yeah. The benefits aren't increasing that much.
No, just the charges for benefits. Sorry. Our contingency line item here for $325,000, that includes the $400,000 that we have included as a contingency for salaries and benefits for fiscal year 14. It's offset slightly by vacancy savings and some other small adjustments that are included in the contingency. Debt service for fiscal year 14 is expected to increase. The primary reason for that increase as a result of our increases in capital projects that include large things such as a fire engine and $1.5 million for our downtown redevelopment projects. There are no monies included in debt service in 14 for a new stadium. We'll see that in the projections later. And then down to excess of revenues over expenditures. We're very tight in fiscal year 14. We have about $1,000 of revenues over expenditures. There is really no wiggle room in fiscal year 14. Then down into our detail of ending fund balance. We're expecting our ending fund balance at the end of fiscal year 14 to remain pretty flat, ending at fiscal year 13 at 9.2 million, and then 14 also at 9.2 million. Unassigned is also expected to remain pretty flat at 8.5 and 8.5 million in both fiscal years. Our undesignated fund balance as a percent of our operating budget is 23% in fiscal year 14, or 2.8 months. I've mentioned a couple of times before that that's very healthy. Our city policy recommends 10% or 1 month. GFOA best practices recommend 16.67% or 2 months. What that tells us is the city's general fund liquidity, and it represents working capital available for us to support our operating needs and future operating needs for debt service and expenditures. Do you have any questions about anything on this page? All right, next page I'd like to flip to would be
Michelle, real quick, if I could just say, so on this
Sure.
page, you show a percentage increase budget to budget in the general fund of 2.9%.
That's correct.
So if you're asked, or if you want to check on, well, how much did the budget go up, our primary operating budget, which is what the general fund is, this table on page 1 and 2 is a good source for you, and then you can track it back by department and divisions within departments for a feel of where were the adjustments. So this is a pretty useful table in terms of what's happening for the proposed budget for next year.
Each one of these departments, each one of the revenue sources listed on this summary page has a detailed sheet behind it included in section 3 that gives you even more information related to any changes and detailed information about some of the things that I just explained. I encourage you to read those. The next page I'd like to look at would be page 6, which is our property tax assessable base. This chart gives us a 25-year history of our assessable base going back to 1988. You can see that from 1988 through 2012, we had increases, even marginal ones at 1.1%, 1.4%. Fiscal year 12, we saw an 11.2% decrease in our assessable base that resulted from the downturn in the economy. 13 and 14 expected to remain pretty flat, and then we have our projected 8% decrease in fiscal year 15. That is going to result in about $1.5 to $1.6 million lost revenue for the general fund. And then down at the very bottom, each penny on the real estate generates about $251,000. That's just for fiscal year 14. When we look at the financial projections back in fiscal year, in section 7, there are some new numbers that you'll want to see for fiscal year 15 that are drastically different from this $251,000. Do I have any questions about the chart on this?
Yeah, the only thing I would like to see in future years, and I think I probably say it every year, but it just doesn't do justice for the realities with not showing a historical combined city tax rate, city-county tax rate. This just gives you the impression, when you look at this and you look at our tax rate, that our citizens have not seen a change in their overall tax rate. And the last administration saw the largest tax decrease in the history of the city. And you look at that chart and nobody would have any idea that there was ever a tax decrease in the city of Hagerstown. And it was the largest tax decrease in our history. Yeah. And without showing the combined city-county tax rate that our citizens are paying, we don't show that decrease. We don't show the offset that, unless it's somewhere else in the budget that I'm missing. And I really think it does a disservice to staff to the elected officials and to our citizens not to see that combined city-county tax rate and see that drastic difference that took place in the last administration.
And that amounts to, by this time, about $1.8 million under the prior formula or more that we would have been pulling in now.
Which is...
It's not reflected on here.
No.
That was prior, we got a grant or a revenue from the county.
Right.
That was inching, that was getting up towards 1.8. It might be almost up to 2.0
Right.
right now.
It's about 12.5 cents.
Well, no, it's not, but you can't
the
use
revenue.
12.5 cents. It was a
Yeah.
different formula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
No,
can't
it's a different
calculate.
It's 12.5 cents now.
It's 12.5
It's 12.5 cents now, but that goes back to our citizens.
Right.
And we have not taxed them to make up for it. That's a simple way.
No, and that's a very good idea.
But you can't use the value of the 12.5 cents because it was based on a different formula, what
Right.
we received.
Right. We do include a combined city, county, state tax rate in the budget message, but we don't have a history of it. So that's good information. We'll make sure that we include it in future
And
tables.
maybe let's see if we can do it here and do an amended page here, because I
We
think that's a
can.
good point.
Yep.
Maybe we can amend this page over the next week or two and
get that out
mayor
to
and
you.
council
Yeah.
updated.
I
I
think
think
it
we
would
could
really
find a
be
good way of
fine.
doing that, yeah.
Definitely.
Good point.
Thank you. All right, if I don't have any other questions here, one other page in this section that...
Michelle, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
But just, and I think everyone's caught this, but if you want to look at the impact of the triennial, just a reminder that fiscal year 11-12, that would have been the first year of the current triennial, and you can see how it dropped in the first year, how it gets flat in the second and third year, and then how we're anticipating a drop in the first year of the next triennial, not as severe as the current, but that's how we're looking at it right now based on what happened in the county assessments in December of 2012. So those are the schedule in terms of the triennial.
Any other questions or comments? Another page that tends to draw a lot of attention in section 3 is the last page, which is page 61, Schedule of Public Functions. This details all of the public functions that the city puts on throughout the year, the Blues Fest, fairgrounds, fireworks, are some of the bigger ones, Miss Maryland pageant. This is a good page for you to take a look at. As you can see, the city spends about $468,000 a year for public functions to improve the life for citizens and residents throughout Washington County and the city of Hagerstown. All right. Let's turn to section 7 now.
By the way, that $500,000 is adds a lot to the quality of life in the city for relatively small amounts, so it's, yeah.
And also other resulting economic impacts if there are visitors associated with that.
Okay, so if we turn to section 7 on page 2, this is the beginning of the general fund projections, 5-year projections. Page 2 includes some of the assumptions that we incorporated into the projections for the next 5 years. For fiscal year 14, we have proposed that the property tax rate remain the same at .788 per $100 of assessed value. We have identified the need to locate or identify new revenue sources or increase revenue sources for fiscal year 15 and beyond. The need for this increase is a result of increased debt service for future capital projects, as well as increases in wages and benefits and other operating expenditures. We've recommended a handful of revenue sources for your consideration. We also suggest and encourage you to come up with others. Those that have been mentioned previously have been a property tax rate increase, stormwater management fee, the implementation of red light cameras, or potentially a fire service tax. I've already touched on the triennial reassessment. The December 2010 triennial reassessment that resulted in an 11.2% decrease had a huge impact on the city's ability to maintain operating expenditures and services at current levels. We've been able to compensate for that decrease in revenue by strictly on the expenditure side by decreasing wages and or keeping wages and benefits flat and decreasing other operating expenditures for capital and projects.
And remind everyone how many positions were eliminated. It was 59 or 57 positions?
We
were
have
eliminated?
unfunded positions. We started, I think, with around 50. We eliminated 11 originally, and we're down to 26 or 27 unfunded positions total. So we've done it primarily on the wages and benefits side. I've already touched on this. The December 2012 reassessments of real estate in other areas of Washington County are seeing decreases primarily on the residential side. Commercial is holding its own in other areas. So we're anticipating that in our December 2013 reassessment that we will see an 8% decrease overall in our real estate property assessable base, and that will impact us beginning in fiscal year 15 and will continue through fiscal year 17. In general, total revenue growth is expected to remain flat or increase slightly, so we've included 1 to 3% increases in the remaining portions of our revenues sources. From fiscal year 13 to fiscal year 14, the overall city portion of state and county shared taxes is expected to grow, and that's a result of our increase in state aid for police protection. We have included 1 to 2% increases for that in the out years. We did receive good news that our state highway user revenues were also going to increase. However, that is included 100% in our capital improvement project program at this point. The county tax rebate that was alluded to earlier was eliminated in fiscal year 10. It was replaced by a county tax rate differential that was provided directly to city property owners, and that began in fiscal year 11. So the county rate for the city is currently 0.125 cents per $100 of assessed value, less than the outside city rate, and it's estimated to stay the same for fiscal year 14 and future years. Wages and benefits. Projections reflect current labor contracts that are expected to end on June 30th of 2013. Currently being negotiated with the 4 collective bargaining units. Wages and benefits projection assume that employees will receive a 2 to 3% cost of living adjustment in, 2% cost of living adjustment in fiscal years 15, fiscal years 15 through 17. Additionally, the restoration of step increases are included in fiscal year 18. This projection includes savings associated with the unfunded positions, and beginning in fiscal year 15, funding is included for the restoration of some of those previously unfunded positions. Overall, average projected increase in employee benefits is 3 to 6%. It's primarily due to expected increases in workers' compensation, health, dental, and retirement program rates being charged to the city. The remaining other expenditure categories are expected to increase just based on their historical trends. Do you have any questions about any of the assumptions that we've included? All right. How those assumptions translate into the financial projections, if you look on page 3, you can see that total personal property taxes from fiscal year 14 to 15 are decreasing by $1.6 million. That is a result of the decrease in the assessable base of 8%. So we're going from $24.5 million to $22.9 million in fiscal year 15. Then it's expected to remain fairly flat for 16 and 17, which is what we experienced over the last 3 fiscal years. In fiscal year 15, other big increases you'll see are fines and forfeitures, $1.5 million to $2.2 million. It's a result of our Safe Speed for Students program, speed camera program. It's increasing about $650,000 there. And then we have a line included for our needed revenue source. In fiscal year 15, 16, 17, and on out, in order to balance the budget, we need to identify an increased or new revenue source for those fiscal years in order to balance the budget and to maintain operating needs despite the $1.6 million decrease in revenues we're seeing in personal property tax, as well as increases in wages and benefits that will occur in those fiscal years. On the next page, do you have any questions on the
Well,
first page?
just an observation. Revenue sources aren't the only way of addressing the FY15 and out year things. Expenditure reductions are.
Right.
And expenditure, there's large capital debt service assumptions, millions of dollars in debt service because of projects that are being talked about. It won't eliminate the whole 3.8 because a big piece of it's the property tax.
Right.
But it's not just revenue sources that can address that.
Right. No.
I'm not, again, making a judgment, but I want to bring that to attention. It's more
No,
than
no,
that.
you're absolutely correct. But what we've heard from the rating agencies is that they've recognized that we've been able to maintain our budget and balance our budget strictly on the operating expenditure side through cuts. What they want to see at this point is us looking at our revenue side, diversifying and increasing our revenue base. So although there are expenditure cuts that could potentially be made, we also need to focus on increasing our revenues as well.
Even without cuts, we could do debt service and get 1.2 million towards that 3.8.
Yes,
And
you're
that's
right.
not a decrease, that's just keeping it constant.
Right.
Well, we can also look at capital projects which will enhance the infrastructure, which make properties more valuable, which increases the revenue that we receive even at the current rates.
I'm not arguing
Yeah.
right now.
I'm just
making the
throwing out
observation.
ideas,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Okay, very good.
Thanks.
Next page, on the expenditure side, this is strictly the summary information. How we were able to come up to the summary information is contained in the pages shortly after that. I'm only going to go over the summary information here. Big increases you'll see here, of course, are total wages and benefits. From fiscal year 14 to 15, it's a 3.7% increase from $25.4 million to $26.4 million. That's $940,000, with $500,000 of it being benefits and then $430,000 being wages, based on the COLAs and that we are expecting to, or anticipating to give to employees. Other increases that you'll see down in other operating, the first line there for contracted services, it's about $200,000 and transfers out to the golf fund as well, or increases, part of it's transfers out to the golf fund, part of it's also increases that resulted from our Safe Speed for Students program. As revenues increase, the contract services that we need to pay for the collections of those tickets being issued are also increasing. Down near the bottom in debt service, as Marty just discussed, we have a $1.2 million increase from $2.2 million to 3.3 million for projects that we've included in our capital projects fund. And then right above that, we have our capital outlay, our transfers to the CIP fund, increasing from $700,000 to 1.2 million. That's also for pay-as-you-go types of projects included in the capital project fund. Pay-as-you-go things are typically equipment expenditures, things that you can't include in your bond, planning types of things.
Vehicles.
Most of our vehicles can't be included in a bond issue, so those are things that we would need to do as pay-as-you-go. Down near the bottom, each penny on the tax rate, we have $251,000 in the fiscal year 14 column. You can see that in fiscal year 15, that drops to $230,000. So because the assessable base has decreased by, or is expected to decrease by 8%, if we increase the tax rate in fiscal year 15, each penny will only get us $230,000. Do I have any questions about anything on this page? Or any of the assumptions? All right, and then if we could turn to page 12 in this section. These are our debt affordability ratios. Even with the tax base decreasing over the next few fiscal years, we are still well within our policy debt policy guidelines. We are expecting governmental debt outstanding to increase from 18.2 million in fiscal year 14 to 28 or 29 million in fiscal year 15. We've included the stadium project and some other projects in the capital projects fund. Percentage of our total taxable assessed value, debt as a percentage of that would be 1.2% in fiscal year 15. It's still a very reasonable amount. Our policy requires it to be under 10%. Our debt per capita is creeping up. It's still well within our policy guidelines for the general fund only. When we look at that for total city debt, which includes our utility funds, we are already over debt per capita of 1,000. So even by fiscal year 18, we're still under 700 or under 1,000, so we're doing okay there. General fund debt service as a percent of our general fund operating revenues. Fiscal year 14, we're at 5.8%, and because our general fund operating revenues are not expected to increase through fiscal year 18, you can see that that number is creeping up to our policy guideline. That number should be under 10%. Acceptable range is 10 to 20%, so we still would not be outside of our acceptable range according to GFOA. However, according to our policy guidelines, we would be creeping up on what our policy requires.
Yeah, I think good business practice, you don't want to get above 10% for debt service.
Have any other questions on this page?
Maybe in a special revenue fund.
Right.
But
Not here. All right, I think at this point I'll turn to the capital improvement program for the general fund.
It's in section 9.
Section 9, there are two tables or lists that I like to look at. One would be projects by funding source, and then one is projects by department. I think that one's probably my favorite. It's on page 22 in section 9.
You put a star on it?
Yes,
Mine too.
I do. I have it flagged.
Yep, it's always a good one.
It's always a good one. Okay. I'm just going to touch on some of the bigger projects that we have included here. I'm not going to go through every single project. Detailed sheets explaining what each project is, what their funding sources are included in the pages behind here.
You're on page 22, correct?
Page 22.
Thank you.
I'll just start on the first page here in engineering. Pavement preservation program, we've been able to increase that to $640,000. That's a result of the restoration of highway user revenue that we've expecting to see in fiscal year 14. For the stadium, we've included $6.2 million in fiscal year 14, and then $27.6 million in fiscal year 15 for a total of $33.9 million. Another big project would be the bridge repair program, C0400. We have $2.1 million included in that. Funding sources for that include $400,000 from the excise tax fund, which is spending down of the current fund balance. It's not new monies that we're expecting. We're just spending down the current fund balance that we have accumulated, as well as federal grant monies of $1.7 million. There are 3 bridges included on Burhans Boulevard.
And this project is already in the initial phases already in our current fiscal year. This would just be the continuation and the completion of those.
The federal grant does require an 80-20 match, so we've used the excise tax funds to provide the city's 20% match for that program. We've included $100,000 for planning of the stormwater management implementation, $360,000 for the Frederick Street culvert.
And the Frederick Street culvert was another one that a portion is excise tax fund funding.
And again, that's spending down existing monies that we've already accumulated. It's not new monies that we're expecting. We have $1 million included for our contribution towards removing the MELP, the Municipal Electric Light Plant. We have $1.5 million included for downtown redevelopment. That $1.5 million is all bond issue. The $1 million for MELP comes from a couple of different funding sources, which would be CIP fund balance, bond issue, and potentially from the proceeds from sale of a property.
And the 1.5 isn't earmarked for any specific downtown project. It's basically a placeholder with a estimate on our part to put a number in there, that's a project you're going to want to discuss further in the process of approving the budget, as you would with the stadium and mill.
In the fire department, we have $1.5 million for fire department vehicle replacements. $450,000 is for engine 1 replacement. We did begin that in fiscal year 13, so we've already paid for part of that in fiscal year 13. This is the balance to finish replacing that vehicle or that equipment. It's also partially funded by volunteer contributions, and the remainder would be from a bond issue. We have $900,000 included for the replacement of a ladder truck. $200,000 of that is funded by a bond issue, and $700,000 would be from contributions from others. The last vehicle that they were replacing would be $100,000 for utility truck in fiscal year 14. Any questions on any of the projects on page 22 that I haven't touched on?
And maybe, Michelle, too, each one of those projects has a project number.
Yes.
And so if you want to look on the detailed sheet, for example, stadium multi-use facilities construction, it's 45C0041. You can flip back in this section by that project number and find the individual CIP sheet for that project.
In this section, we have summary information for the general fund and in each of the utility enterprise funds. And then starting on page 46 is where you'll start to see those detail sheets on all these projects, and they are in order numerically, starting with the general fund, which is 45.
So these are, the sheet that the two Michelles are focusing on, 22, is a good place to start because you can look by department, then you can find the project, then you can find the project number, then you can flip back to that page if you want more detail.
Okay, on page 23, we've included $770,000 for parks improvements. We're expecting to go over that at another work session in more detail. We'll have Rodney and Junior come in to go into a little more detail about some of the projects that are going to be included in there. We have $210,000 included for police vehicle replacements. 5 of those new vehicles are contingent upon the mayor and council approval of a new take-home vehicle policy that we'll come back to you later with, as well as the replacement of 2 other vehicles within the police department. In Public Works, we have $225,000 included for the replacement of 2 dump trucks and 1 truck. Most of these vehicles have been deferred for a number of years in the Public Works Department, and they're well beyond their useful life. Finding that it's time to replace them. Any questions about any of the projects on this page?
Other than, I'd like to say on vehicles, we talked about it a little bit last year. Because of the deferrals, as we worked our way through the recession, we did lose ground on vehicle replacements, and we're starting to catch up. You can see some pretty significant numbers in the fire vehicles that they touched on. But I think we're still catching up in police and public works and all of our operations as we are in fire. But it's an area we need to keep track on because, as you know, several of these operations are very dependent on the quality of the vehicles. And it does impact our operations.
Okay, and the last page just kind of gives you the total of $15.6 million in fiscal year 14. I'd like to take you back to page 51, which is project C0041, the stadium project, so that you can take a look at the information we have contained there. This is an important page for you to look at. We have $6.3 million in fiscal year 14 for planning, design, and land acquisition, and then $27.6 million included in fiscal year 15 for the construction of the stadium. Funding sources are on the next page. We've continued with the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 funding ratio that we had used in last year for the music project. We have 1/3 of it coming from state grants, 1/3 of it coming from city and county funding and 1/3 of it coming from private contribution. Private contribution can consist of monies from the Suns, it can consist of monies from prominent local citizens who just want to make a contribution, capital fundraising drive, so anything can be included in the private contribution. Do I have any other questions about any of the general fund projects before I move on to the parking fund?
I do want to make a comment that, I've heard from others that there's people in the business community say, well, the original stadium was funded. And it was always my problem that it wasn't funded, because that private contribution line wasn't filled with a backable guarantee or promise from anybody, much less. I think there's people saying, assume that assessments will go up, take the risk, and that will pay for that in lieu of the private contribution. But that's asking this, you can already see what financial condition, that's asking an awful lot. Somehow we need to fill that 9.2 million funding gap. Almost anywhere we build, if we build a new stadium, it's going to cost the same at any of these sites, within a few hundred thousand, within even a few million, it's going to cost in that order of magnitude.
Yes.
So we're going to need that order of magnitude from other sources. And as I pointed out, already the debt service and the CIP general fund contributions are assumed to go up a lot, and we can't cover them now, even under these assumptions.
Right. For the music project, we had incorporated $15 million from a private donor. Now, we don't have that $15 million,
right.
but we would still be able to replace that with naming rights, which would gain $4 to $7 million of that 15. So the gap is still close to the $9 million that you were talking about.
Right.
Oh, and I don't want to make this presentation today a discussion about a stadium, but I'm still at the numbers I was at 2 months ago. These numbers are well above it, and the formula's very different. I heard over and over that that basically the debt service would fund itself. For the longest time now, and that's why I asked the question about, operating, and I see it's at $75,000 for the operating side and $35,000 for the capital side, which is about $100,000. So it's not the $200,000 year over year that I think that the public has been led to believe that the figure is, at least not for this budget.
Any other questions?
Yeah, my main point was that, and I didn't mean to get into it either, was that private contribution segment of the financing has not materialized, and that is what I'm talking about when I say the stadium is not funded. Even if you favor it, that has to come, it can come from other things, but it needs to come forward somehow.
Yes, you're correct. Okay.
Joe, could I ask a question?
Sure.
I go to page 23. We're talking about the police. One thing I noticed that's missing here, although it could be included in one of these, is cameras for police. We all know we're having a spate of problems in the alleys in the north end of Hagerstown, and I wouldn't be surprised.
Mike, your mic, turn it on. No, you're right.
Thank you. I wouldn't be surprised if we're not having problems with many of the alleys in all ends of Hagerstown. Frankly, we need to figure out some way to put cameras in these alleys on a permanent basis, not for 15 minutes at a time. Is there anything in here that allows us to do that? Or was it talked about?
Not in fiscal year 14 budget.
Are cameras included in operating?
Why don't we put that on a list?
We'll take a look at that. That may be included in
operating.
operating.
If we talk about them, but
I don't think we made any assumptions to purchase additional cameras.
well, that certainly is an oversight, I think. But we can talk about some
But
of
that's also a good one to go for grants. We've gotten a lot of grants in the past for those sorts of
It's also
things.
something paid for by the speed cameras.
It's part of public safety, so.
Right,
yeah.
although the speed cameras money is built into this budget now.
So
Well, we'll put that on the list, we'll come
We'll put
back.
that on the
have
list to
chief
take a look
ready
at.
and- Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Well, I would only note that I think it was the other week I was talking to, I believe it was the mayor of Frederick City, and I said their camera system was working, and noted that they don't have any cameras. So, I hear the discussion about cameras, but I question, the breadth at which, we use them in lieu of actual public safety services.
For parking fund, I think what I'll do is go straight to section 7 and look at the financial projections there. There is detailed information included in section 4 on the parking fund for the current budget, as well as the prior year history. If we look at the projections, section 7.
What page?
Page 25.
25 on the assumptions. All right. For fiscal year 13, we've included no rate increase in the parking fund as well as in any of the out years. Our rates are as follows: for the parking deck, it's $60 per month, or maximum of $8 per day. Lot rates are $46 per month. We have included an increased usage of 1.5% annually in fiscal years 15 through fiscal year 18, but no rate increases at this point. Mayor and council are contemplating the construction of a third parking deck, and discussions are still in preliminary stages at this point. Funding sources have not yet been finalized. With the possible construction of a new parking deck, deck revenues would increase beginning in fiscal year 15. However, we need to point out that revenues would not increase enough to cover operating expenditures plus new debt service requirements. These assumptions were also derived when we thought that the primary user of the deck would be the Board of Education, and that primary user would not be paying for spaces. So these assumptions have changed some since this document was prepared. Additionally, new parking deck expenses and fees are included in the projections for the third parking deck, and they're based on average expenditure trends reflected for the other two decks that we have. Similar to the general fund, we've included a needed budget adjustment or a needed revenue source line item in the parking fund projections to show where we would begin to have shortfalls of revenues for operating revenues over expenditures.
So what's the expected what's the expected debt service on a new deck?
We'll get to that when we go through the next pages here. I'll point that out. Operating expense increases are a result of increases in part-time wages and employee benefits, a result of increases not only at existing decks and lots, but based on historical trends and the new deck that we're proposing to implement in fiscal year 15. Depreciation expense has increased in the current fiscal year and is expected to increase significantly in future years as a new or a third parking deck is brought online. Future bond interest rates are estimated to be 4.25%, and we've used a 20-year amortization rate at this point. Do you have any questions about any of the assumptions we've used?
Well, until we hear the answer on the debt service,
Yeah.
yes. but
Okay.
I'll wait for the answer.
All right, so if we go to the next page, which is where the numbers are for revenues, you can see that at the top section, we've had our revenues increased here in fiscal year 15 for the third parking deck for $75,000 for a half a year, and then in fiscal year 16 through 18, full year of $150,000. Those assumptions have now changed based on usage for this deck increasing, so those assumptions will change a little bit. We have our needed budget adjustment included towards the middle of the page and other operating revenues. You can see that in beginning in fiscal year 16, based on the current revenue assumptions for the third parking deck, as well as debt service assumptions for the third parking deck, we would need approximately $380,000 in increased revenues beginning in fiscal year 16. Down in operating expenditures, parking deck 3, our third parking deck has operating expenditures included in there of $59,000, then $120,000. It's pretty much in line with our other 2 parking decks as far as historical trends. Then we show our depreciation expense increasing from $250,000 in fiscal year 15 to $451,000 in fiscal year 16. It's a result of the third parking deck. Interest expense would increase in fiscal year 15 as a result of the third parking deck from $77,000 to $275,000. So $200,000 is the interest portion of our debt service that would increase. In fiscal year 14, the funding model for the third parking deck included $350,000 of grants and native construction. And then principal payments on debt service are included on the next page. They would increase from $174,000 in fiscal year 14 to $647,000 in fiscal year 15. So debt service is about $700,000 a year for the third parking deck.
700.
Yes, for principal and interest.
And the 350 is the ARC application the Mayor and Council recently approved.
Correct, the Appalachian Regional
Yeah.
Program.
Do you have any questions about either of these 2 pages?
The only other thing I'd like to add is that as we met with Moody's and S&P on our bond rating, they also keep an eye on whether we borrow from one fund or just transfer from one fund to support another. And they didn't look on that very warmly because they see that as you're not supporting that fund's operations enough from its own revenues. We've done some of that over the years. It's not an automatic disaster to your rating, but it's something that you'll hear the Michelles and I say we need to keep an eye on just because we want to make sure that we're preserving our bond rating best we can. So that was something we heard in 2011 when we met with them. Keep an eye on this idea of transferring from one fund to another to help it out.
And as Michelle pointed, needed budget adjustment is a pretty, $380,000, $325,000. Those are big numbers coming from who knows where.
Right, and that's the challenge in the parking fund.
So if you look at the bottom line, it's not. I mean, those are balancing numbers put in to make, but they have to come from somewhere.
Right. Yeah, to make the third deck work will take a lot of effort from staff and the Mayor and Council to come up with the numbers to do that. Unless there's a major influx in new parkers for the downtown.
Willing to pay appropriate fees.
$60 a month for permit fees or daily fees.
Right. Okay.
But Councilmember Brubaker's right. The kind of the decision point is right in the middle of page 26, where we've balanced it. In effect, we in some ways balanced it out, but we're showing that we've got to come up with that money, one way or the other.
Right, and that's the same thing we did in the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
Either come up with that money or come up with an expenditure cut, as Marty pointed out.
And I guess for me, that's the part I've had a little confusion with these various projects that have been proposed to be tied to a third deck, because if you're, if that proposal was that it was generally going to be self-supporting through that process of analysis, and you're foregoing revenue on 250 spaces to one entity, tied to 140 spaces to another entity, giving up 390 spaces. Even if both the stadium and the Board of Ed project would have occurred, I can't make those numbers work as they've been reported. So
Mm-hmm. Right now, neither of our parking decks are self-supporting. They're both supported by
the
lot and parking street meters.
And I think this is probably a project better for us to work on with the mayor and council early on in your budget review process than saving it towards later. Because we know it's of interest to members of the mayor and council, and we'll need some work on it.
There are no stadium revenues assumed here, right?
No. Correct.
Just want to make clear.
It would strictly be
No,
use.
no stadium revenues at the moment. Okay.
And with a third deck, you would also see some cannibalization, so to speak, from the other two decks. You would see some of those tenants moving over to the new deck, so those revenues would decrease slightly as well.
Could we, Michelle, while we're on the subject of the deck, just bring the mayor and council to the CIP page so they can
Yes.
see that? That might be good timing to.
In section 9, the CIP page for the third parking deck is on page 173, which is also project 173. So we have in fiscal year 14, I'll wait till everybody gets there. Section 9, page 173. We have in fiscal year 14 included $1.4 million for planning and design as well as land acquisition, funded by the $350,000 grant that we just approved recently, and then bond financing. Fiscal year 15, we have $8.5 million for construction of the deck, completely funded through bond financing. We've included about a 500 space deck. Detailed information about the deck is included on this page.
So it's a starting point when you want to get into that discussion. And just to clarify, the grant application was approved by mayor and council, but we haven't heard back from
Right.
ARC.
We don't know if we've received the grant or not.
Well, and I think a significant piece of that conversation then is, size. I mean, clearly you don't have the entity that, were slated in that initial conversation, the Board of Ed. You don't have the necessity of 140 free spaces to the Suns. So, clearly part of that conversation is an issue of size.
Also, the length of the term on the bond.
Right.
We use 20 years. You may want to
Revenue assumptions have changed. Everything has changed since.
Well, that's all part of the work that we'll need to do on that project.
I think those are pretty much the highlights that I wanted to show you from those sections. Do I have any questions about anything that I've gone over, anything that I didn't go over that you'd like to hear about tonight? Thank you. The other thing that I'd like to go over tonight, the bond or the budget schedule to fill in dates for that.
Yep.
I don't have mine with me. April 30th, I believe, is a 5th Tuesday for April, and we wanted to leave that up to you to decide whether you wanted to have a budget work session that day.
Dave, I guess I was going to make a suggestion. I was thinking about that. I was wondering if the council would be in the mood to try to finish off next week, because right now we're at that first thing. Next week is the 16th, then we have the legislative session, I always call it that, then the next week, our regular meeting. That leaves the 30th and the 7th for discussion, and we have more discussion than just this. I think we have a stadium, we have SORA, and I think the mayor wants to move those along with the budget if we can. They're so intrinsically tied to this. I was thinking if we could move items 1, 2, and 3 to next week as well as the last 3 items. I'm sorry, the last 3 items on the page, the property management fund, electric fund, water fund. So we just finish going over the budget next week, and then
There's a 4.
4 and the 4. Sorry, just that.
So do everything next week?
Well, it's wastewater fund is a big item, but I'm just seeing if folks would be willing to do that. That would give us the option of the 30th. We haven't scheduled a meeting, and the 7th, depending on where we are, to try to figure out some of these tough issues.
And we really don't have that much leeway in the utility funds. I mean, they're
go through
massive
them.
numbers. They're
Right.
very large numbers, but other than deciding on what we're doing with rates, it's not like we're going to decide we're going to not spend money for this or spend money, versus in the general fund where we have to decide where we're going to spend money. So, you know, while the utility funds are very big items, there's really not a lot for us to make decisions on other than rate recommendations, right?
Well, and next year is the 5th year of the rate schedule, so that's already in place for the coming year. We'll be back into the next fiscal year to talk about that next 5-year schedule.
Right. And
I think the only real decision item I can think of on the utilities, if you're not counting, well, wouldn't count parking, would be that water fund transfer to the general fund. I think that's the one new thing that we've
Right, but we can bring that in, that's sort of part of the general fund discussion in some way.
Otherwise, I mean, you approved the large capital project in March for the R.C. Wilson project. We've kind of been feeding you those CIPs along the way.
I just hate to spend a whole lot of time, even though it's a whole lot of money, on things that we don't have much.
And again, we're going to do the rate thing next fall, right?
That's
how we did it last time.
Yeah, I think it'll be early fall. We'll want
It
to come
certainly
back in
makes
and
more
start
sense
talking.
for this body to deal with that
We do that
after the budget.
Yeah, because the rates are set for 13-14.
Right.
They've already been approved. So I don't think there's any surprises in the utility funds, I guess.
No, I'm just suggesting we get through the budget next week, if the other members are willing to do that.
The only,
Don't you have a full schedule next week?
well, the thing is, we have a function at 6 p.m., so that shortens the amount of time that we have at our work session.
What do we have?
It's a celebration of business at 6 p.m.
Oh.
They're very good at dinner.
That's one where they recognize businesses in the city and county of certain
And we have a
tenures.
tour of the Maryland Theater at 3, so we're
ambitious.
We're limited in our window of time.
I don't have my
My
calendar
goal
yet.
and my plan is to have a work session on the 23rd, starting at 3 p.m., where we have a presentation from Sora, and also we have the Ripken report presentation at that time. So that'll be a busy afternoon and evening. The legislative session, or the regular session as you call it, shouldn't be too big of a deal, and if we have to push that to 8 o'clock to get in those other two big important items on the 23rd. So my thought was that we would likely be talking about the budget on the 30th and the 7th, basically every work session after that until we wrap it up.
Right.
I just don't think
I was just trying to get clear time for that, that's why. Maybe on the 23rd, we could have an early.
Well, the 23rd will be the Sora and Ripken. That'll keep us occupied, I think, for a pretty good work session. But if we devote all of the 30th to the budget, I think I'd be amenable to that.
Okay.
Any other thoughts?
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
All right.
But we're going to,
questions.
what time on the 30th? 4, 3, 4, what works for you?
4 o'clock is.
And also, we need to make sure, I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing that we're going to be meeting at 3 or 4 o'clock on the 23rd. I just say that because we need to know it for schedules. I don't
Finalizing that with Bruce and Donna
Please let us
tonight.
know as soon as you know. So we can,
I've confirmed some times with our presenters, so I just wanted to make sure we have all that nailed down before we publicize it.
So we'll be back on the 30th on the budget. If you have any questions, you want to review details, feel free to contact the two Michelles or me. They're always available to sit down if that's helpful.
All right. We are on to City Administrator's comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle's.
No other comments from me tonight.
Mayor and council comments. I'll start to my left with Mr. Munson.
No comments from me tonight.
Mr. Alshire.
Just a couple of comments. I'm trying to think of what I went to last week. I attended a meeting of the Neighborhoods First, a Neighborhoods First group last week, a downtown Neighborhoods First group, and there were probably 6 or 7 young professionals that own their own homes that are part of a group that have concerns, and I continue to believe that we should get a little more involved with our Neighborhoods First groups, give them a little more communicative direction, and correspondence. I think it's a good thing. You know, they brought up issues of being a bit fragmented, not really sure how to communicate with neighbors to get involved. So, you know, anything we can do there, I think is good. I also attended the EDC strategic plan presentation. I guess that was yesterday, right?
Monday, yeah.
Monday, yeah.
Yesterday.
So I know there were a number of folks there. For that meeting, I'm not really sure, you know, what all the discussion will lead to, but there were obviously folks there with various opinions. And I attended something else last week, and I don't remember.
Basil. Sister City dinner last night.
Oh yeah, the Sister City dinner last night. Even though we were relegated to eating in the nursery room down at the church, my 3 little girls liked that, so I was fine with them. But it was good, you know, being out and meeting with the group and the kids that are over. So I think that's everything. And I gotta go.
Thank you. Mr. Brubaker.
Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend the Sister City. I had another commitment, and I assumed you're going to talk about the museum, so I will leave that to you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Friday night, and I know Councilman Brubaker attended, was a Holocaust Memorial Service at the synagogue, and I was very impressed. I think that synagogue was probably the most crowded it has been, and I think Don was there also. Were you there, Don?
No, I missed.
Probably the most crowded we've had in the last 10 years, and that was not necessarily a function because we had every Jew in Washington County attend, but there was a very large attendance from the churches and the Gentile community. It was a very nice positive turnout, and I just want to thank everybody for it.
Last week I received 2 phone calls from 2 property owners, and the issue was bed bugs. Evidently, we may be seeing an epidemic, who knows? But unfortunately, where the bed bugs started was in a rental property, and so far 2 families have moved out. Where they've moved to, that means that they probably have carried them with them. The 2 people that do own their own properties now have got to go through the whole extermination process. And whether or not it will be resolved, I don't know. But there are 5 row homes that are connected to this. And unfortunately, I hear more when I'm out as there being an issue. So I just hope that we can stay on top of, and if people are aware of the fact that someone does have them, then, you know, please inform somebody, because this is not going to be a good situation as they continue to travel. Also, last week, when I had asked about the building downtown, which I understand is called Soul Haven, has been there for 10 years. And that would be this part of Franklin Street, first block going west. And when I did talk to the one provider of money, said that because it has grown in counseling, and this would be counseling the mental as well as those who have drug and alcohol addictions, so they have spread their wings. And I had talked to the individual and I said, you know, I'm really concerned with what we have that are on the sidewalks. And I said, and it's like, you know, if you're walking by, we don't have to move, you know, this is ours. And I said, you know, this just is not good. And then I was told, well, you know, there has been opposition from City Hall with Soul Haven. And I said, well, to be quite truthful with you, if it's been there for 10 years, I don't know why I haven't seen this outside before. Well, it is because now we have more of what is going in there. They're also offering a soup kitchen. And the soup kitchen, now I'm being told, is being monitored, that if in fact you are enrolled in one of the programs, you can have that lunch. But if not, you cannot come in. But as people continue to learn about these places, and this has been my concern, and it's not that all of them are Hagerstown residents. They are going to continue to come in where all of what is being offered is there. And the gentleman that I had talked to said, well, if the city has a place for us to relocate, you know, that would be wonderful. Well, you know, then I had said, well, I didn't say to him, because I said, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to ask. And I talked then to another individual, and I said, gee, how about the Susquehanna Bank that is not in operation out here now, that's right across from the old Zares parking lot, which, you know, you have the amenities of a lot of the Burger Kings and the McDonald's and all of that, and it's far away from the downtown, and still being able to offer the services. And then the individual said to me, you know, why doesn't the churches become involved in all of what we actually have and get it to one area? Because we have a spread of this and a spread of that. And then I'm going up Church Street, and because I'm taking care of my father, I'm seeing now on the market lot Wednesday and Friday. And then I was correct in my thinking, and then I was told about the article that came in the paper. And this is another soul something, but it's 2 churches, and now we are feeding the needy, as well as anybody else that wants fed, right on the parking lot. So, you know, I just don't know why all of them can't get it together. That we continue to look at this location, that location. You know, we've already brought in the Reach Center. And I guess we will probably be looking at a daytime facility. And who's going to do it? I don't know. But certainly we need to move it that it is still, they are accessible to wherever their needs are, but they can go out a little bit further. And that's just a food for thought, because I'm seeing more and more of it.
How about the almshouse?
No, don't go there.
Well, I mean, it's alms. You're helping.
Helping the poor? No, that was the mentally ill there first, and then the poor, and then whatever, and then the Confederates and all of that. Don't get me off track. You've already messed me up with even saying that tonight. But, you know, it's just duplications and duplications. So how is it that we can get it that it's all together? I guess it's because everybody that opens a place, they're getting a piece of that pie. So that's why we're going to continue to have nonprofits. And
I do
again,
appreciate your concern for that, Penny, and I just was asking Bruce if we had a loitering law or something that prevents large groups of people from hanging out on the sidewalk with no purpose.
Yeah.
So we're going to look into that and
Yeah.
chat more about that.
We did have it. At one time it was on the, and also yard sales, and I had addressed John Lestitian with this, because now right beside the almshouse, and I'm seeing, and not that it hasn't been before, because there's been one out on Potomac Avenue that has actually been in the little park where the Korean Memorial is going to be located. But there was people setting up for over a year out there, and that's city property.
And you know what, though, Penny has a good point there. I appreciate what you just said. However, Penny's point, which I'm hearing, is the solution isn't to run people from one spot to another. The solution is to find an appropriate location.
Yeah.
And we've had enough committees over the years trying to, it's almost like the report that we got on the arts and entertainment, that we need some type of centralization, and in downtown central core of Hagerstown is sure not the place.
Correct.
But the solution is to find the place, not just to run them out, because then what's going to happen is there's going to be another location that's going to be just as
It'll be whack-a-mole. You have one place will show up another
and the
place.
folks that we're dealing with are not bad people.
No.
I mean, it's not like these are people these are folks that are looking for help, can use help, and there's also a lot of good people supplying that need. We need to do it in such a way that it's advantageous to all concerned.
Yeah. And this was not my idea. This was the person that I was talking to, you know, that is a city employee, you know, I mean, and he made sense. And then that's when I brought up the
Consolidation of services.
you know, the Susquehanna Bank building, because I don't know who all's in that now. The IRS used to be all of that. But certainly there should be something that should be. And again, you know, whether or not the churches want to pick up on that, because we've got churches now that are involved in revitalization of. So, you know, they need to think both ways. But anyway, the yard sale, I'd like for everybody to ride by the almshouse. Speaking of that, Saturday and Sunday, they had a large yard sale. And that would be the apartment building that is right beside the Alms house. And it meant that it was on Alms ground property. And that's why I brought up out there. That was city property, okay? And nobody is getting any say as we can do this. So this down here, whether or not it's set up tonight or not, but just please go by and look at everything that is still there, and whether or not it's going to get put out for trash on Wednesday night, I don't know. But I don't have a problem with yard sales, I really don't. But this is on city property, and I think on city property there should be something that should be done about it. And the yard sale, I got a phone call they thought was last Saturday. A person called me. It is this Saturday out at Fairgrounds.
That's my wife was asking.
Community yard sale.
Yes, community yard sale.
one
Yeah, I
now.
got the phone call at 6:30 in the morning. That's all.
Thank you. And I just want to say that I had a pleasure judging National History Day last Saturday morning at Western Heights Middle School. Lots of excellent student projects there, and it was a pleasure to help out with that. I did attend the Sister City dinner last night, and the students will be leaving this week to go back to Germany, and I look forward to visiting Basel sometime. We did have a wonderful lunch today for a State of the Museum of Fine Arts presentation, and just want to thank Rebecca Massey Lane and all the folks at the Museum of Fine Arts for putting that on for us. And also, it was a pleasure to meet our special guests from the Netherlands, because they have a sister museum over there in Laren, in Holland, and got to meet them and present them with the Hagerstown flag. I do want to remind people that this Thursday is opening day for the Hagerstown Suns. Yours truly will be throwing out the first pitch, and my goal is to not burn some worms and get it across the plate. So I've been warming up my rag arm and getting ready for that. Also, the very same night is the opening of the Maryland International Film Festival, happening right here in downtown Hagerstown. I mentioned it, I think, last week. There's a special showing of Argo that starts at 6:45. I think it costs $10. And afterwards, Mr. Tony Mendez will be attending, so it'll be a very special occasion. And also, I'm going to be honored to throw out first pitches for the Little Leagues this Saturday, so I'm looking forward to that as well. Thank God spring is here. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.